Hello, my name is the Jordan, and I'm coming out of retirement. Or not really. Don't hold your breath. But Sammax messaged me the other day and said, hey, you've used Swampert with success. How do I use Swampert better? And he didn't get back to me when I wanted to call him, so I'm offering this knowledge to all of y'all. If you leave this video thinking Swampert's a great Pokemon, nice, but I want to get one level above the particular Mon. I want to talk about, hopefully do a number of these, and talk about Mons that fill a lot of roles, that fill important roles on a VGC draft league. And you might not have Swampert, but do you have the kinds of things that Swampert provides? That's an important consideration when you're drafting. So I'll consider it a success if I've spent significantly less than half of this video on literal stuff, like here are the moves it has, here are its stats, etc. But more how it functions, how it works together with other teams, how it works together with certain play styles, and then just I will give you a final verdict on how good I think Swampert is. Spoilers, really good. But we'll talk about Swampert. We'll try to do these under 15 minutes, but this is my first time. I got to do some introductory stuff, so we'll see. I'll refine this model in the future, but let's talk about Swampert. I've got a lot to say about Swampert. It's a fantastic Pokemon. But the highest level is that this is a Pokemon with good all-around stats and an amazing typing. One other assumption I'll make is that you're a reasonably experienced Draft League player. This is not for the beginner series. I don't want to spend time saying that Water and Ground is a good type, but it is a great type, and this is one of my overall number one rules for Draft League, is if you can have a Mon that is good against a lot of Mons and relatively few Mons are good against it, that's the recipe for success, and Swampert definitely fills those criteria. So it has an enviable combination of high overall stats. For reference, the average attacking stat for a fully evolved Mon is something like 80 to 90, and for defensive and speed, it's like 80. So Swampert is above average in basically all of them, except for speed. And the way you play Swampert, which is getting ahead of myself a little bit, makes speed less relevant. And so Swampert has all the moves you want. It's got support moves, it's got attacking moves. The main thing is that it's not aggressive. It's not threatening that turn 1 Oko with a massive attack stat or a massive speed stat. But you want to play Swampert in a way that one weakness is not really much of a weakness. So this is the literal portion. You can look at Swampert and see its stats and typing. That's universal, but I do have to quickly get into what it has. So it's got all the moves you could want, physical and special stab moves, good stab moves, good coverage. The only thing I would be missing would be like Iron Head if it had the better steel move, if it had close combat. I mean, this is just wish list stuff. If you've got water, ground, and ice, you can hit 90% of all the Mons you'll ever face. And it's got good moves on both the physical and special side. And yeah, there's a difference between the physical and special attacks here, but that versatility is very helpful in Draft League. There are certain Mons that you really want to hit with a special move. There are certain Mons that you really want to Scald Burn, and just knowing that Swampert is useful in both directions is just a wider and wider threat bubble for the opponent to cover. That's one of the overall points I want to make, is that a good Draft League has a very wide threat bubble, and Swampert adds a lot to the diversity of things that you could do both at the start of the game and over the course of the game. So not only are we hitting basically any Mon it wants super effectively, or at least stab neutrally, Swampert's got speed control. These are not necessarily the top moves to put on Swampert, but it's got multiple options to control the speed, and it has a couple of options to control damage and support without just speed. Yawn and Wide Guard are very important moves, Wide Guard especially in non-max formats. Going to try to avoid definitions of what these moves are, but two really good setup moves. So it can become a physical setup sweeper, and it can become a lot more specially bulky. It's rare to have both of these moves. Swampy might be one of the only Mons that has them both. But then there are some other tools, and these are not normally things that I would call out. There are moves that I don't list here that I'd say are rarely useful, but the way you play Swampert, which is more often defensively, all of a sudden moves like Rest and Sleep Talk can work in VGC. All of a sudden Stealth Rock can actually work in a pivot-heavy defensive game. Swampert controls the game. It slows down the game with Yawn, it controls the speed, and then it just does reliable damage and makes sure most of the time you don't do that great damage back to it. So that's the move pool that rolls into the overall package of Swampert. Its overall role is a bulky attacker most of the time. I've got 6 different things here, but it doesn't need to be the fastest. It doesn't need to be the strongest. If it does 50% to you and you do 40% to it, it's winning that matchup. There are other mons that are more of a shootout. It's either one shot or get one shot, but Swampert is not that kind of mon, with the exception of grass moves. But Swampert, if all it did was provide a check, does your opponent have good grass moves? If it doesn't, then Swampert just wins in the end game. If you have the ability to remove the few mons that have grass, grass is not a type that every mon gets access to. There's no grass punch, there's no grass fang. There's basically energy ball with all like the psychic types get, but very few mons get leaf blade that aren't grass types. Very few mons get a power whip that aren't grass type. There are a few, of course, but knowing you can basically spot all of the grass moves on your roster, and that's high tier draft league right there, is having a checklist of every single grass move. That's how you would play Swampert, honestly. But knowing if I've removed the 2 mons that he has that have grass moves, then I win the game, with some exceptions. Swampert really can win those end games with Yawn and Bulk Up and just chunking through. Swampert, its weakness is speed, but with speed control, Swampert's doing fine. Speed works on multipliers, so it doesn't need... It can be 20% behind other mons, or even 40% behind other mons. If you double your speed with Tailwind, Swampert's going first. Swampert, overall in a draft league, there are some mons that you're like, this mon's really good here, and then there are other mons you're like, I can't bring this because it gets too hard countered by these 2 mons that they've got. But you want mons in between that you're like, this mon isn't going to win me the game, but I can reliably bring it. Swampert is always going to have matchups it wins. It's always going to have matchups that it is a strong neutral matchup, as in it's at least even. Swampert provides that team building check about, do you have grass moves? There are basically 2 ways to beat Swampert, and of course I've talked about grass moves, which are relatively easy to spot, I should say, and grass mons suck in general, so it's not too bad. Among 4 times weaknesses, grass is not too bad. But the other way to beat Swampert is you just overpower it with very strong, fast, neutral hits. I've talked about Gastrodon on this channel, and I think, spoiler alert, Swampert is even better than Gastrodon in a number of ways, but if you don't overpower the Gastrodon, then it is going at least even against every other mon. Most mons don't have or carry a grass move, and a lot of the time Swampert can hit you super effectively with all these moves. But even if it can't, even if it's just hitting you with Waterfall as it's hitting Swampert with a tri-attack, just an even matchup, Swampert's gonna win a lot of the time. The difference is if you are aggressive enough. I'm just running around here with the slide deck. But you have to overpower with just really, really strong, fast hits. Swampert is going even with Porygon Z, but Porygon Z is faster than Swampert and just really strong. So they're probably both two-shotting each other. I think it would be difficult for Swampert to one-shot it with a fighting move, though we're going 1 level above the calcs here. But PZ is going to get that second hit first and overpower the Swampert. So that's how you overpower it. That is just more of a testament to how good Swampert is, though, knowing that the best you can do most of the time is neutral matchups, and so you just need to be more aggressive than Swampert is. But these are the only 2 great ways to beat Swampert. There's a decent way to beat Swampert, which is just outstall it. If you have access to recovery moves, if you have access to scaling, if you have access to sleep and other ways to just slow the game down and to scale yourself just a little bit faster and stronger than Swampert, you can win that way. But Swampert does have Yawn, it does have Bulk Up, so it has its own tools in that regard. So this is a decent way, is to just play even more defensively than Swampert. But that's not, I would say, plan A or B. Pacing. I've gotten into this, but this is kind of one of the overall points about Swampert is that it is not a fast-paced mon. It thrives in slower-paced environments. That means no Dynamax. I'm going to mostly assume no Dynamax because that's the future of VGC Draft League, but I do have one slide about how it gets better and worse in Dynamax. But it is not taking that turn 1 Oko. It is not stopping you from moving before you even get to move. That's not Swampert's deal. That's how it negates its middling speed here, is saying that I'm not going to beat you over 1 turn, I'm going to beat you over 4 turns, I'm going to beat you over 6 turns if I have to. So Swampert is slower paced, and it's not a stall mon. It's definitely doing reasonable damage in most circumstances. It's not Chansey, it's not Bronzong, and it's definitely not Pheromosa. It's closer to defensive, but the ability to do a little bit of everything well, and particularly how you build it in Draft League. You can put a Life Orb on it if you want to. You can max out its attack. You can give it coaching boosts. You can give it bulk up boosts. This is the Dynamax difference. On the surface, Swampert does well in Dynamax. It has a Stab Max Quake, one of the best Max moves. It's got a Steel Spike, and it overcomes Iron Tail, not the best Steel move, by just turning it into Steel Spike. Max conceals Physical versus Special, which is important because Swampert can viably learn both, so that's just another buff it gets in Dynamax. And Max, as a defensive option, helps Swampert live that 1 grass move and then overpower the 1 check to Swampert with an Hellstorm. That can happen, and it provides some insurance in Swampert's weaknesses. But I think the more you think about it, the more Swampert is even better without Dynamax, because of the overall playstyle, which is fast and chaotic and high variance that Dynamax for games are, and that's just not Swampert's strength. Turning a Solar Beam into a Max Overgrowth and Okoing the Swampert, or just a very strong Max Strike to overpower the Swampert. Swampert doesn't get to do its bulk up stuff. It doesn't get to yawn if it's getting 2-shot. I mean, it gets 1 yawn, but that's not, any mon can get 1 yawn. So it wants to be able to live 2 hits, 4 hits, even more. And so Swampert, just as your main offensive mon that you're investing heavily into, it's just not getting those Okos. Just from a numbers perspective, 130 versus 110 doesn't sound like a big difference, but 130 attack is the mon you want to max a lot of the time to get those 1-hit KOs. So overall, I think you want to play Swampert in a way that brings the game down to a more like a 7 to 15 turn game than a 2 to 5 turn game, and Dynamax is more 2 to 5 turn and therefore better without Dynamax. Question: do you have respect for Gastrodon and Quagsire as defensive Pokemon? You probably do. Now, these mons have their own little gifts to them, but these are the other 2 best water ground mons. I guess Seismitoad's in the discussion, but surprise, Swampert is even bulkier than both of them. Gastrodon is equally bulky to Swampert on the physical side, but on the special side, but Swampert is more bulky on the defensive side. I ran the equivalent calc, so you have to balance out HP with defense and special defense, but Swampert has overall higher numbers on all 3 defensive stats than Quagsire. It doesn't have Unaware like Quagsire, but Swampert is the bulk lord of water ground types, and knowing that you not only have that elite typing, but also elite bulk. This mod is bulkier than Incineroar. It doesn't have Intimidate, but it is bulkier. 190 plus broken typing. That's the number 1 asset to Swampert. Abuse the hell out of the fact that not a lot of mons can get through Swampert easily. Use that time to your advantage. So team context really matters for Swampert. This is Jace's team in the BDSP format, so a low power level format, not a lot of great mons. Raikou qualifies as a strong aggressive mon in the lower power level format. This is a kind of team that I think maximizes Swampert's strengths. There is no other grass weakness, and then if you look at the team overall, I need to bring 2 grass moves and very strong neutral hits if I'm going to check Swampert specifically, and now I've run out of space. I'm putting a strain on my ability to check the other 10 mons on the roster. You definitely do not want other grass weaknesses with Swampert. You want to make it as difficult for the opponent as possible to team build correctly. Do you have a good fire type, a good flying type, the ability to remove those grass types, and also a good dark type, to remove the energy ballers? Swampert is possibly the best water type in Sun. Water is a classic type that you want because it has few weaknesses, and there are a lot of good water types. But if you want to build a Sun team, you still usually want a water type because you're not always playing in Sun. Swampert is one of the best mons for a Sun team, such as this, because it does not need its water-type moves to be effective at all. Ground moves, rock moves, ice moves cover everything you could possibly want, and it's got stab, ground moves, plus coverage, rock and ice. So it functions perfectly well, and the fire mode, the sun mode, crushes all of the grass types that would beat Swampert. So that's just another place where it excels. Looking at the team context, Swampert's in the middle speed area, which means it benefits from speed control. But it doesn't need to go first. You're playing Swampert in a more defensive manner so that you don't really care if you're going first. You're just outpacing them over time. But it still benefits under Tailwind. And more importantly, if you have a team that's very fast and aggressive, some of the mons are fast and aggressive, and then there's also a strong Trick Room mode, you're forcing the opponent to fight a lot on speed control, which Swampert doesn't really care about, right? If you're trying to establish speed control with Icy Wind and reversing Trick Room, and Swampert's just chunking you with high horsepowers, then Swampert's winning, right? It's not winning in one turn, but it's winning over 3 or 4 turns. You're missing the point if you're trying to outspeed Swampert, right? You need to be beating Swampert definitively, or Swampert's probably beating you. My final verdict on Swampert is a 1 to 20 scale, because a lot of points draft boards that cost mons on a scale of 1 to 20, roughly. So that's a good frame of reference I have. Let's put it at a 13. That is above most mons. It's above the vast majority of mons, if you're including, the baby mons. But it is a highly viable, high-tier mon you can take on the earlier part of your draft. I will say that its strength is more variable than most mons. If you're packing multiple grass weaknesses, if you're not packing the equivalent aggressive teammates, then Swampert's just sitting there and it's getting slightly outpaced, which is not what you want. Don't do that to my Swampy boy. So use Swampert as a defensive mon, use Swampert as a reliable mon that you can bring all the time, use Swampert as a controller of the game via speed control and wide guard and yawn, and just a chunker. Chunk, you're dead. Leftovers, great on Swampert. Assault Vest, great on Swampert. Life Orb, usable on Swampert. Rindo Berry, the grass resist berry, just to remove its one weakness, very good on Swampert. When you have few weaknesses, you know what they are, and you know how to build around them, and that is what Swampert does. If you don't have Swampert on a draft league, do you have mons with few weaknesses? Do you have mons that you can bring a lot of the time and know that they're going to pull their weight? Do you have grass moves? Because there are mons like Swampert and Gastrodon and Quagsire out there, and you do not want to instantly lose those matches. Think about that when you're drafting, and let me know in the comments mons you want to be on the Draftables series. I already have a few in mind. I'm not going to talk about middling mons or bad mons. I'm going to talk about mons that fulfill an archetype and a role very well. So think about great mons that are underexplored, underappreciated. Those are the good candidates for the Draftables series. Already got a few in mind. Take care, everybody. Have a good week.